Records in the database. So let's talk about that. So we're going to talk about relationships and the terminology or the syntax that we use between relationships. We're going to talk about SOQL, which is our query language. And then by that time, we will be done with the day. So tomorrow we'll get into SOSL and DML. Okay? So in Salesforce, when we define relationships, relationships are defined with one of two types of fields. Either lookup relationships or master detail relationships. And on the child record, we create the custom field that refers to the parent object. Now when we create that field, it being a custom field, usually, it is going to end in _C. But we also provide you with a mechanism to refer either to the parent from the child record or from the parent to refer to the children from that parent. Okay? So taking a look at this, here we have a relationship between position and interviewer. From each interviewer record, we can reference the parent using a special field called position _R. From the position, there's another field called interviewers _R to refer to those child records. All right? The way that this works is that this gives you the ability to obtain an object-oriented reference to another record and then use dot notation to access fields on either that parent or, for that matter, on the children. But essentially we provide two different fields depending upon the direction that you're going. You can actually find out these field names. So if you have trouble remembering these and you're saying to yourself, what field do I need to use to refer from a position down to the related list of interviewers? You can always go into the schema browser and take a look at those names. Now let's take a look at the way that this works. So the way that this works is that when I define that custom field, so assuming that this is a custom relationship, when I defined that custom field, what we did was in the database, that field is holding the foreign key of the related record. So for instance, in a table on the job application, in this case here we're doing job application to position. So in the job application table, I have a field called position _C, and that field holds the ID of the related position. It's classic primary key, foreign key types of relationships. Now, when I created that custom field, in Apex, and for that matter in formula fields, a second field was created, which is the _R. The _R contains a reference to the related record. So whereas the C stood for custom, R stands for the reference to the related record. Okay? I can then use that reference to now access those fields on, in this case, that parent record. All right? So notice the data type down here. On my job application, the position _R is a reference to an instance of a position object. All right? The same thing goes a little bit differently in the reverse direction. So when I'm on the parent, I have a list of child records. So all of our relationships within Salesforce are one to many. So when I'm on the parent, I can have a list of children. And for that reason, we create a field on the parent, in this case, called job applications _R. So from my position down to the job applications, this would reference a list of job application records based on the fact the one-to-many relationship. So here's the way it works. If we're talking about the child it has two fields, position double underscore C and position double underscore R. If we're talking about the parent, it has a single special field called job applications double underscore R to refer to that related list of children. If it's a standard relationship, there is no double underscore C, therefore there is no double underscore R. So here's the relationship between an account and a contact. Every single Salesforce customer has this relationship. On the child, on the contact, there is a field called account ID, which holds the ID of the account record. There's also available to you in Apex a field called account, which can be used to obtain that object-oriented reference to the related account record. From the account, we can refer to the related list of contacts using a field called contacts. Okay? So the naming convention is a little bit different depending upon whether or not you're working with standard relationships or custom relationships. Now the value of all of this is later on we're going to be creating join-like queries, in which case we're going to be needing to refer to the parent or referring to the children. All right, so let's talk about SOCL. SOCL is the Salesforce Object Query Language. It is truly a query-only language. Every single SOCL query starts with the exact same keyword, which is select. Okay? It is case insensitive, much like Apex. It's used in both Apex and our Web Services API, or for that matter, our REST API. It typically returns a records or the number of records found. So the idea here is that if I execute my SOCL query, I get back a list of records. And here, in this case, I'm selecting select name from position where type equals part-time. I get back a list of positions. An important thing to understand about SOCL and the data that you get back is that you get back a strongly typed result. You do not get back a generic result set. You get back a list of positions. Okay? There are two ways that you can execute your queries. One is to surround your query with square brackets. The other way is to build it up as a string and then to execute the query using the database.query method. Okay? So let's talk about those return types. There are strongly typed results that we get back from doing our queries. So in the first example, here I am selecting name from position double underscore C where type equals part-time. The return type is based on the from. So I'm going to get back, by default, because I'm going to find multiple records, I'm going to get back a list of positions. Now I could, if I wanted to, set this equal to a list of S objects, but it has to either be a list of positions or a list of S objects as my return type. The single S object, this is a shortcut. So if you're going to do a query and you know that you're going to find only one record, what you can do is you can do a search, and in this case, either where you're saying, ID equals something or limit 1. In that case, you can just do a single S object, and once again here, set that as our return type. One thing to note about using the single S object, it assumes you're going to get back one and only one result. So if you get back multiple results or you get back no results, it's going to throw a query exception. The integer is when you perform a select count, and so here when we select count from position where type equals part-time, we get back the number of records that we found as in the form of an integer. There are a bunch of SOCL functions which are available, so we can calculate subtotals, we can calculate averages and sums and so on, so we can have the database do a lot of the math for us. Bindings. The colon indicates the essentially an escape out to Apex to go look for either a variable or to execute some apex as interpreted as an expression. So taking a look at this, here I have a string called job type equal to full-time. Here I have a list of positions, which I'm going to get back. So select name from position where type equals and then colon job type. This is now going to insert full-time, and I'm going to perform my query in order to find full-time positions. You can also do this, which it doesn't have to just be a variable. You could actually have apex contained within parentheses. So this is a little bit silly. You wouldn't necessarily, concatenate full plus time, but the whole point is just kind of academic that that's possible. Okay, so when you do a database query, you only get what you select. All right, so here I have an example. We are selecting ID from account, and we're then multiplying 2 times A1.annual revenue. This is going to throw an exception because I did not select the annual revenue. This is basically null. Okay. Now, if I do this and I select annual revenue, I can now perform some math on that field value. Now, the exception to this rule is that the ID is always implicitly returned. So you never need to select the ID unless that's all you need, in which case you got to have something, so you might as well just write ID in there. So there's a special type of for loop that involves SOQL queries. And what this does is when we have a SOQL query as the result of our, or as the list that we are operating on, what this will do is this will fetch the results and then provide you those results, in this case with the single variable, one at a time. Okay? This one down here, if you identify that the iteration variable is a list, this will return 200 records at a time. And so what these basically do is they act as a query more. So this second one, let's say this returns 8,000 records. This query will count as one query. It will iterate, in this case, 200 into 8, that would be 40 times. It's going to present us with 200 records at a time. Now, the advantage of using this is that if you think about your heap space, this is going to give you 200 records at a time, and let's say you're only interested in finding, let's say on average, 5 out of 200 records. You can keep a reference, so create some other list, keep a reference to those 5 records per iteration that you want, and then what we're going to do is we're going to automatically garbage collect the other 195 that you don't care about, and then present you with the next list. One of the problems that you could run into with just doing an inline query is that you could get up to, in the case of the governors, up to 50,000 records, but you're loading them all in at once into memory. And going back to that issue of only selecting what you need, you have the possibility of utilizing too much of the heap space. Okay? All right. So think of this as a mechanism to do a query more. All right? You can't change the 200 size. It's an optimized number that Salesforce is built to work with. And so that's just the mechanism or the way it works. Okay. So when you're writing your code, and this gets back to our governors. So if you had the singleton, you would never want to have a DML statement inside of the loop. So you can run into an issue here if you put DML, or for that matter, something else within here. Now, let's say that I do the list version. This returns 200 records at a time. Now this is kind of a magical number, 200. It's the maximum size of a DML operation in our SOAP API. It's also the maximum size of a batch in Apex when we're passing it off to a trigger. So 200 is a number that you're going to see over and over again. It's basically our database is tuned and optimized to work in batches of 200. So this returns 200 records at a time. What people will sometimes do is create a for loop, operate on their data, and then down here perform a DML operation within the loop. But the nice thing about this is because the DML operation is inside of the loop that's operating 200 records at a time, it's essentially a bulkified, it is a bulk safe algorithm that you've just created. Okay? So it's the one case where we would say it's okay to put DML within a loop, or for that matter anything else.